And just want to go ahead and let you know I have a great guest lined up. I'm very excited to do this interview. We're going to be covering a lot of topics. So I definitely hope after this interview, you definitely check out this person's, show on the One Great Work Network. That's how I did find his
Is
information and love what I've been listening to. He's also an author. He's written two books, one called Slavery Gone for Good, Modern Abolitionism, and The Wisdom of Nature. So the two books there. And he also does have a live stream show that he does on the One Great Work Network. And I think Twitch, he'll have to correct me. I'm not, but I do definitely know it's on the One Great Work Network every Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So definitely check that out if you do like live shows like this. And so I'm very excited to have my guest on. I want to welcome them. This is welcome, Cory Edmond. How are you this evening?
Hey, thank you for having me, Crypt Rick. I'm glad to be here.
Perfect. I'm excited to have you. I've been looking forward to this interview all like for the last few days for sure. And I know we have a lot of topics to cover. So that's why I was letting people know. I hope that they will go and check out your work on the One Great Work Network and where else you can point them at the end of this. I'll make sure you get time to let everyone know where they can find all your work and what you got going on. So we'll definitely cover that at the end. And I hope that people do check out your work. You're doing amazing stuff. And I mean, we've only got 2 hours here and we got a lot of topics that we want to touch on. So I hope that they do find your work and dive into it deeper because we can only go so far in 2 hours. So I hope they will definitely check out your work. Amazing stuff, Cory.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely get through a lot, though. It's my job as a teacher of this knowledge. I consider myself to try to deliver this in an easy way for people. You could go down the rabbit hole for hours all day, and maybe people can relate to this. They've done research before. They're like, man, I want to learn more about this topic or that topic. But I think it's the role of people who want to be teachers, who want to educate the public, who want to make it easier for this knowledge to get out there and to more people, that we make things a little bit more simple for people. We deliver them in different formats and add our own spin on it.
I agree, 100%. I agree, and that's probably a good way. Like, let's kind of like touch on because we were talking about when we were off air about the independent media and how important it is. Because as I was saying at the intro, and I say it every week, that definitely the major platforms are really, and I've experienced it myself, Cory, where they are just. I've had interviews that were pulled before they even premiered. They were just waiting to be premiered the next day. Just by the title alone, they yanked my video and struck me down for it. And I know a lot of other creators that are doing this work, and they're not able to get the information out there easily because it's being censored and yanked down, as I say, and they're definitely not letting it get out there. So, what is your I just want to get your thoughts on the independent media and the state of it. What do you think needs to happen, get fixed, or just what your thoughts are basically on the independent media at the start?
Yeah, that's a good question. To tie back what you said about censorship, that is very, very important. Obviously, if we can't get the ideas out there to begin with, I mean, people, they may only have one choice in their life when it comes to health, right? Like if, let's say, there's a natural medicinal out there that is proven to work for a certain condition, and we only are exposed to the pharmaceutical version, how will we ever know about the alternative if that gets censored all the time? If people talk about it in videos and the algorithms pick up on the words that they're saying, the titles that they're using, the thumbnails that they're using, the images that they're showing, and it's too offensive or it's misinformation and it's all this stuff, which it's kind of hard to know what is misinformation. Right. According to the platform, it's basically whatever they just don't want out there. And of course, we have the option to go to other platforms, and that's what's been done. Is now there's new platforms like BitChute and Brighteon and Odyssey as like YouTube replacements, and there's a lot of other replacements coming out of the woodworks. And you see, there's like the whole Twitter thing going on. So a lot of people obviously want freedom of speech. They're seeing the censorship happening. Hopefully, more people are starting to notice it, and they're wanting to make these companies get held accountable. But at the same time, we have to recognize that, yes, we have to be the change, create the platforms if they don't exist, and support those platforms. And for people who are like, well, why are you still on YouTube, Cory? It's like, Well, how did you learn about Brighteon or BitChute? Likely through one of the mainstream platforms. It
Exactly.
doesn't hurt to get the truth out anywhere you can. It doesn't matter what platform you use, and that can actually help bring people to the alternative platforms. And if it works better than YouTube, if it works better than the mainstream platforms, I think people will want to stay there anyways. You know, a lot of the old dinosaur media, people don't trust what they see on TV anymore. People would
Hmm.
rather watch Twitch streams. People would rather go on Twitter for their news feed or Instagram and see the latest memes. You know, the times are changing, and we have to keep up with those times. And so with the information, how we deliver that information, a book back then is a PowerPoint today. You know, it's a
Exactly.
video today. It's technology just becoming more advanced, and it doesn't have to be the enemy of the people. It could be the great tool of the people. It depends on how you use it as an individual using such technology, such a tool.
Right.
So for the independent media, this is the great deal of, well, how do we create change? Because independent media was created by definition as an alternative to the mainstream media. The
Yep.
mainstream media is not trusted by the people. You know, people are seeing that they're lying, they have agendas, they're biased, etc. And the independent media is like, okay, we're going to take this upon ourselves to do our own research, to have actual investigative journalism, and bring that to the public and educate the public ultimately, which is what I'd hope would be the objective of all media, which is to educate, not to put them in fear or propagate, the minds of the
Exactly.
masses. The goal should be education, and that's something I stress greatly. Again, I refer to myself as a teacher. I see all of us as teachers. We all have something to share. We all have something that somebody else doesn't know, and it's just a matter of putting that in a format that can be digestible. So when it comes to censorship, then, in combination with independent media, we have to question, how are we going to defeat that? And this is a question that I've been tackling. How do you defeat that? Well, maybe we actually need some real life action as well. Maybe the independent media needs to unite more in their efforts.
I
And I've
agree.
been calling for this for the past couple years. And to be honest, I've been asking for a critique upon some of the creations that I've made. I've made a movement for independent media to unite upon, as I see it as essential. I mean, if you had independent media to share one message, one flag, one symbol, what have you, you'd already have millions of people in the movement right off the bat, enough to
Yep.
change the world. I mean, independent media is that powerful in this current state and age. Now, you can look at different independent media businesses per se, and maybe they make their business off of playing the political games. Maybe they don't want to talk about philosophy. Maybe they don't want to escape the two-party system. I'm talking
Hmm.
about InfoWars and some of the big guys out there. I think they put out some really good information, but also, are they getting to the root of what freedom is, how we achieve freedom, and are they encouraging people to go to their neighbors, to meet up in real life and get involved with organizations like Freedom Cells, and also educate people on what needs to be educated? Are they having just this mere conversation of what should we do for action? And I
Hmm.
just simply do not see it. I haven't seen it for 2 years, and I create a movement. I ask for a critique, to say the least. I offer it to these independent media organizations, and nothing. And I'm not a big content creator. I don't expect to be seen, but I have been seen by some pretty big people out there, I would say, or people with a general fan base. But even then, even within my own network, I don't see the particular actions that I've been stressing being done. And some of them are very simple. Like I said,
Right.
having some shared symbolism or shared websites. Because if we have that, then it says, wow, here's a voice that's amplified. And I like I said, I'm willing to improve. I created a website for a movement. It's called nita.one. It stands for Nature is the Answer. It doesn't have to be the way I envision the movement to be. The way we change the world doesn't have to be the way I envision it to be. I simply want the conversation to head that direction. I read
Right.
over 100 books in like a month trying to figure out, well, how could we change the world? What are all the resources that we can find? Could we look at the past and the movements like Gandhi and the American founding fathers? How did they do it? They often protested taxation. They got together. They started their own newspapers. They educated the public. They stood their ground. They didn't have
Hmm.
to take up arms to the state and declare their independence. No, they simply had to say, we are free, let us be free. Gandhi managed to do it with no weapons. That's how powerful a moral cause can be. But to put it in application, there are requirements. There's requirements for what we want in the world. And
Exactly.
I've actually found out there's three in particular that creates a really strong movement. And I could give you two examples of a very successful movement
Perfect.
nowadays.
Yep.
So would you like to hear it? Yeah.
I would, yes, for sure. I'm right into this. Yes, definitely. Go ahead, Cory.
So the three aspects I see for a successful movement, based again on my research, my understanding, is one, representation, two, education, and three, integration. So integration would be people coming together. This should be obvious. You don't have a movement without people coming together, but you also don't have a movement without a central idea, and that idea needs to have education behind it. So that's number two. And then number one was representation, which I consider the forgotten step, and the first and foremost easiest step, if anything, which is to have some sort of flag or symbol or representation. And I think a lot of people in the freedom movement, or people who care about freedom, they're moving away from symbols. They're moving away from sort of collectivist notions. I don't blame them. I don't want to join a group or a club or a team or anything like that. I'm myself. I own myself. But at the same time, there are requirements that, like I said, can amplify our voices and say this is where we belong, and it can get the message out to even more people if we shared it with one another. So representation comes first, education is the next result, and then integration is the next result. It's actually a very gradual process that happens naturally, because let's say somebody views this radio show or a sheet, a flag, or any sort of material, that's going to lead them to something else, to knowledge. And that knowledge, they're going to be like, if they think it's impactful and they think it's going to help people, they're going to share that with others. And then if everybody agrees that this is like really powerful, then what you have already is a movement. And even me, creating a movement and creating a foundation, maybe I don't have to do that, because that will naturally happen as more people start to be educated about statism and natural law and a lot of the topics that you talk about on your show. Mm-hmm. But does it help to have some sort of foundation, some sort of structure? Because we see it's actually really essential. So if I look at two successful movements today, I can name two. And I know people might have some controversial thoughts about them, but you know what? They're successful. And that is something we need to notice, is that if they're succeeding, how are they succeeding? It's the same way you can look at how were people brought into the system of deception of government. They had to get there somehow. It was through symbolism, it was through occult messages and meanings, it was through getting down to that subconscious and manipulating people from birth. We're not trying to manipulate people, we want to deprogram them. So maybe we want to offer our own symbolisms, ones that aren't going to manipulate people's brains, but actually wake them up, reverse the process, right? And introduce the counter information, the counter technologies, the counter alternatives, like I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. And then what you have is a powerful solution. And so a movement is definitely essential. But yeah, so the two movements that I see are really succeeding at the moment is Flat Earth movement, which people are going to have
That's very true. Yes.
People are going to have strong opinions about them. But again, regardless of your opinion about this movement, they are successful. You can talk to anybody around the world and they generally know what it is. They generally know even what the flat earth looks like according to their model. It's the Gleason's map, it's the circle map with the Polaris in the center. They have a shared symbolism. They all stress education. They all, there's groups all around the world who translate each other's works and they network, they come together. They have all this crazy stuff. Even Eric DeBay put out a video recently talking about how we can do all these things to help promote the truth. And that video is fantastic. Again, even regardless of your views on that subject, the strategies they used brought them success. And even if you say, well, the CIA operated or they got assistance here or there.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
Regardless, they still have the strategies that will allow them to grow. And Eric DeBay was one of the first people who got on top of this knowledge. And then a lot of the CIA agents and such started to take that work and use it for their agenda. He has many videos about that, and I even had chats with Eric DeBay. He seems pretty genuine. He covers all his criticisms, so it's just important to look at that. And maybe somebody's gonna be like, well, he's an agent and he's controlled. Again, regardless of the actions, though, that I'm looking at in particular here, another movement I can use as an example is the common law assemblies. If you know anything about the common law assemblies, these are people who are like, you need to become sovereign, basically get rid of a lot of your licenses and permits and correct your status per se. These are different terminologies they use. But they have such a high stress on education. Everybody that gets involved and needs to know about their knowledge, it's all education. And when you get involved with them, you realize you see a whole different reality. Every time you see a regular American flag, you're like, wait, that's the corporate war flag. Every time you see
Yep.
a license plate, you're like, wait, I'm asking for permission to be free. They completely reprogram your whole reality to the point where the system that it is, the corrupt system, just doesn't make sense to you anymore. So, I mean, that's just one thing that will just blow, your worldview out the window. Although, I might be critical of it because it's not necessarily talking about natural law or morality. It's
Yep.
still, like I said, within the actions of this movement. They have all three. They have their own flag, which is the U.S. civil flag of, I think it's 1779. And it's one that I have behind me, actually, in my office, which is a flag that a lot of people the olden time know about. But it's basically the Star-Spangled Banner, but opposite. So the lines
Opposite, right.
are up and down. It's totally different, but it's a flag that represents peace, not war. And they're using that as their flag, their emblem, which is great because then they can create more of a presence. And people are like, what is this flag? Why is it being used? It causes a lot of questions. Then they get into all this education. Their networking is insane. These guys are creating their own court systems. They're creating their own assemblies. They're trying to find new people and educate them. I mean, this is what I want to see in independent media if their ideas are going to succeed at all. In my opinion, I don't think we will succeed no matter how big natural law or statism gets to the public. I don't think we will succeed without a movement in one way, shape, or form. Like I said, some will naturally grow, but they need to have this structure in order for them to sustain and have some sort of foothold, especially
Right.
through the censorship. Because once you have a real life base, censorship can't defeat that. Censorship is weak compared to if you have a lot of people in real life connected and building communities. Nothing can beat that.
I agree totally with what you're saying, and I wanted to ask you because talking about the independent media, and I'm looking at it from what I see. I see a lot of the problem is that it's kind of like what you're touching on. I just see a lot of infighting. To be honest, I
Yeah.
just see a lot of groups. They're not, and I keep saying I've said on many shows and interviews that I've done that is one of the main reasons why we're not getting the traction that we need and getting enough of the information out there and people even presenting this information is because they're too busy. All these groups are fighting amongst themselves, and I think that that is kind of by design in a way. Possibly, I think that
Hmm.
maybe there is some manipulation going on, and groups are getting infiltrated, and they start putting the seeds in of this, deceit and arguing and stuff like that. But do you see that happening? Because that's what at least from the groups that I'm keeping track of and looking at, I just see a lot of infighting and nobody's coming together.
Yeah.
And how do you, yeah, like you were saying, how do you tackle what we're facing if we're not in a one unit and we're all fighting amongst ourselves? We can't get any traction.
They're creating their own fears. Like they say,
Right.
the zombie apocalypse is happening, and honestly, to some extent, independent media is partly responsible for that
Yep.
happening by mentioning that, by manifesting it, and make everybody believe that it's happening. Doomsday is going to happen, collapses are going to happen, even if true. There is some fear factor in that, not just in the mainstream media. We see it in the independent media as well.
For
There's
sure.
problems, of course, that you can find everywhere, and there's people also in echo chambers, right, where people want to stay within their communities and they don't want to expand elsewhere. So I agree. What we need to do is open the mind and also be open to confrontation, meaning I will go to flat earth conferences, I will go to political conferences. I may not like it, but you know what?
Hmm.
That little spark of fire, that little spark of controversy can do great wonders in certain people who will never be exposed to alternative information if it weren't for me doing that. I went to so many different places, and yes, I can get ridicule, and people will try to. I've had times where people will yell at me, even if I'm the most respectful person on earth. I never raise my voice. I don't even curse. This is how I am on camera too, on my channels. I keep it generally pretty professional. I have documentaries addressing every single topic, but are they going to look into that knowledge? Most of the time, no. But if they're
Yep.
if they're being confronted with that information, with somebody who stands for that information often, uh, their annoyance of that, their ignorance of that knowledge they might expose themselves if they start unleashing their anger out on you. And then other people will see that and be like, why is this person getting so angry at him? He's just trying to have a conversation.
Yep.
And that's what I've had happen. It's like there's some sane people in the room who will look at me and be like, wait, he's not saying anything bad. And then they'll talk to me after and be like, yeah, I'm sorry you had to go through that. Like, and I'm like, gosh, at least somebody has empathy. Because like here's a young person, right? I'm not that old. I'm pretty relatively young, just trying to have an intelligent conversation, and they don't even want to hear it. They don't even want to talk about it. But again, we can't be afraid to face our fears. I mean, this is the number one thing we have to do to achieve anything in this life, whether you're going to the gym and going to gain muscle or you're trying to expand your mind. You have to face the things you don't want to face. You have to confront it. You have to get down to it. You have to be courageous. You need to just start doing it, practicing. Like you start your own radio show, right? And you're going to keep doing it. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And you become better at speaking, you become better at doing it. And you start meeting more people and they help you. And you may say, well, that can get you secluded in an echo chamber, but that's your choice. You don't have to be in an echo chamber.
Exactly.
You can still go out of your echo chamber, try to find other communities like I'm doing, and people that have no clue what this information is, and still just try to get it out there because it's planting seeds ultimately. And
that's what I say. Yep.
And who
planting
needs that
seeds.
knowledge the most? Think about it, right? It's the people who are never exposed to that information, who never do research for themselves, who always get their information from the mainstream media. They need that knowledge the most. But if they're secluded in their echo chambers and you're secluded in your echo chambers, how will the bridges ever meet? You know, and in the common law assembly, yeah, they don't talk about natural law and morality. I see that as a big problem, but is that going to stop me from collaborating with them? Is that going to stop me from trying to see what I can do with them and introduce those ideas to them? No, I'm going to actually talk to them. In fact, because they're more out of the system, they might be more receptive of what I have to say. And they are.
Yep.
I talk to the people in the Common Law Assembly, and I'm like, this is some of the most receptive people I've ever talked to, and they're not political. But, you know, they're doing some things that might be considered political, but
Right.
they're on the edge. It's like talking to a minarchist or a libertarian, and they're not like fully an abolitionist or an anarchist, right? They're on the edge. They're not quite there, but they can be if they perhaps have more information to sharpen their worldview. And I'm sure there's some listeners right now who maybe have that minarchist or libertarian point of view where they just want smaller government, they just want limited government. And, you know, I have videos addressing this. You can check them out as well. And it's just a matter of knowledge, right? If you attain more knowledge of how things work and you're like, well, wait, maybe it doesn't have to be limited. Maybe it can never be. Maybe it's in the nature of the system that it simply cannot. Can you limit slavery? You know, if you allow any violence, does that allow it to grow? So these are just mere questions. And if you ask yourself these questions and run the logic through your head, you realize maybe it's just all an illusion and something that we were completely just taught to believe. If I look outside my neighborhood, do I see people generally living in order? Do they need necessarily some centralized police state telling them to live in order? No, I don't think so. I don't think
so either.
Yeah, I don't think so. Especially if you're in America, I think you could see it a little bit better because more people have their own firearms. If you're in a different part of the world, you're a little bit farther perhaps from more freedoms. It's going to be harder to see what freedom looks like. So it's when you're more wrapped in the illusion, you're going to be more likely to embrace that illusion. And when you're going closer to nature, you realize that nature is the answer and you're embracing it in more parts of your life, you start to realize that it is the answer across multitudes of different factors. Like I was in health. I would realize, hey, natural medicine can heal the body. You just have to support the body, what the body naturally is supposed to do. But what if we apply that to natural law, what we're supposed to do in the world socially as human beings? You know, what if there's things we're intended to do, supposed to do with one another? You know, talk, I don't know, play games, have fun, just hang out. And what happens when one person or few people have an agenda and they want to disturb that? Is everybody going to feel a sort of disturbance in the order? There's an order that happens when people get together and they want to share ideas with one another. And that order, I think people start to understand. You know, natural order can be differentiated from natural law, but you get the point. Is that there's a harmony within the universe. There's an intelligence that we're tapping into to understand what we should do, what our actions should be.
Right. You say it perfect. Wow. Like exactly. And I agree. the problem I'm having though, Corey, if I'm being totally honest, when I try to present a lot of this information, because I totally agree with you that it's very dangerous to get into an echo chamber and surround. I think that some people maybe get surrounded by people that are like-minded in thinking. They understand all of this information of natural law and objective morality and that. So you kind of think that that's how everybody thinks. And so I
Mhm.
agree with you that it's very dangerous to kind of get secure in your little echo chamber and not reach out and have discussions with people who may not even know what the natural law is or any of these topics that we cover. But you have to be willing to go out of your side of your safety zone and have these discussions. I think that's where true magic happens, if I for a better lack of a better way to
What
describe
in
it. But
hell
I think
is
that's where
happening?
these real conversations is where things happen, and I think people have to start doing that. The problem I'm having, and I don't know if you've run into this, but a lot of the people I talk to, they don't even want to listen. That's the thing that really gets me kind of not angry, but it's definitely frustrating. And I don't know, some people have been doing this for 15, 20 years. I tell you, I got to admire them because they are definitely sometimes it gets so frustrating because people just don't seem to want to even take in this information. And I always tell people, you don't have to believe it, you don't have to agree with me, but please just at least take the time to look into this information, such as natural law or any other topic, objective morality, the occult, and you name it. And I'm just finding a lot of people don't. They always have the excuse that they don't have the time, or I hear a plethora of excuses, and I'm just wondering, is that something that you've run into, and
Mhm.
how do you get people to actually, like, I'm kind of at the point now where I think that people just, I like the way you said planting seeds, because I've said that too. The best I can do is plant seeds, because I don't think I'm going to wake anybody up. I think they have to kind of want to seek this information out themselves, and then they're easy to kind of work with, and you can point them to all this great information. But how do you do that with people that don't even want to open their mind up to even look at it? I've definitely run into a lot of people in that category.
Yeah, they have to have some sort of personal drive or purpose within their life that really drives them to want to seek out the information. So,
Right.
if in a sense, we need to connect with each individual individually and recognize what is it that they currently know, what is it that they currently want, and what does that tell us about their mind? We need to connect with them first before we can just be like, you need to check out this information and go on this channel, and because we can probably overload them, if anything,
Yep,
sometimes
I've done that.
overwhelm them, and they're like, yeah, now I'm definitely not going to look into it. It's like, there needs to be a gradual transition. And for us, how did we get there, right? I got there by surprise, didn't expect to run into certain knowledge, but I did ask a lot of questions. I had some sort of internal drive driving me throughout the
Yep, me
years
too.
with a purpose of what I do want to find the truth. I do want to ask questions. I do want to have an open mind. Why should I stay in my own, echo chamber of thought? And so I questioned myself constantly, and that allowed me to come up to the positions that I currently have, which some people are questioning actually in the chats that I see,
Right.
which I can get into. But
Sure.
yeah, it's a process, and we need to connect with people and understand what they're currently thinking. Because if somebody has a purpose, like let's say they just want their family to be well off, they just want their kids to have a good future, right? These are basic essentials that a lot of people want. Maybe we can make an appeal to that. And address that and connect it to the ideas, so that way they have some sort of interest in those ideas and realize that actually it's essential, right? If we're talking about slavery and we're talking about violence and we're talking about the future and what could potentially happen if we do not learn our lesson, if we do not
Right.
learn from history, that's something that I'm pretty sure anybody should want to know if they want to secure the future for their children or for their life, and they have plans, if they see all the craziness in the news, they watch the news, they're like, oh my gosh, there's all this confusion and chaos.
Yep.
They probably should want some clarity among why that chaos is happening, and we can provide insight, like how do you get to that point, And what creates that actually? The philosophy side of things, because people in politics, they don't look at philosophy. People in philosophy don't always look at the politics side. Like there's gaps in every group, right? There's always
Very
something
true. Yes.
to find. I can appeal to people in religion even and talk about God's government. I could say, well, hey, you believe in God, and he has this president over a lot of people. Well, what makes man's law, man's government legitimate? Does man have a place among God? Does God write the Constitution, as a lot of people claim? What makes it so, that it's a God-made Constitution? And I'm just interested to hear their thoughts about that. And so if I learn more from them, I could just ask questions on their belief system rather than imposing my belief system upon theirs. It should not be the case. I should ask their own belief system, because if anything, there would be contradictions within themselves if they believe that violence is necessary or that government is necessary, when we know that government, by definition, is a monopoly on violence or slavery, as 100%. I like to say. Yeah. Now, in order to back that up, because now I just made a big statement that a lot of people who are watching are like, what is that? What are you talking about? I'm an abolitionist, okay? That's my views. I don't call myself an anarchist or a voluntarist. I can if I want to, but I think they come with a lot of different other notions that a lot of people drag into the conversation. I like to say abolitionist because it gets to the heart of the matter. We're tackling slavery. It's a moral issue.
And can you let people know what that means? Because some people that are listening, maybe they've never even heard that word or what it means. So let's kind of cover that just so we can get a foundation for that.
Sure. Abolitionism comes from the word abolishing, right? So it means that we're abolishing something. People have used it to say abolish this, abolish that. In particular, abolitionism is the movement that was used in the 1800s to free the slaves from chattel slavery. Right. So this is one particular form of slavery. And for me to bring back abolitionism and bring this to the modern day and age, I'm insinuating that there still exists slavery, but in different forms, not limited to chattel slavery. Because chattel slavery still exists, but it's clearly not as aggregated as it used to be. Why? Because people see it generally as morally wrong. Not necessarily because it's illegal, but because they see it as wrong. If I ask the average person, like, hey, why don't you just chain this person to a wall and call them your slave? They're going to be like, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to do that. That's immoral. It's like common sense for them. But if you go back 200 years, it's like, oh, this is common practice. This is economics. This is how we make everything work. How would we pick the cotton without the slaves? Everybody has their own slave. Basically like a little local government in every area, and everybody's thriving off of the backs of another. But yet, when we freed the slaves, cotton production actually got even better, and our freedoms increased overall. We had a lot more innovation, and this is the deal, is that we fear freedom. The slaves especially will fear their own freedom, and they might be convinced that they should be slaves.
Yep.
But, and we can relate this to nowadays, people believe they need to be...
I was just going to say that. I was going to say we can relate that to what's going on right now.
People will relate this to nowadays, right? And they say, well, people are participating in politics and these rituals of, let's, write down these fancy words on these fancy pieces of paper and call them law and tell everybody else to obey them, even though it's claiming ownership over somebody's life and property. And is that not slavery? When somebody is telling you you have to pay this or else, and you have no choice in the matter of what to do with your own labor, your own fruits of your labor, how is that not slavery? You are not voluntarily choosing to say, hey, yeah, I'll give my money away for this project. Yeah, I'm willing to help build a road, supposedly, right? Because that's what everybody thinks their money's going to. And
100%. I hear that all the time.
And
actually,
yeah, and it's in these arguments, when you really start to look deep into them, and I have videos, like I said, addressing each one of these, they just don't make sense. And there's a really simple question that you can ask people if they are essentially an abolitionist or an anarchist. Do you believe there should be a third party? If two people want to trade with one another, like, hey, I'll give you some apples for some oranges, and they're like, okay, yeah, I got an apple tree and this person's got an orange tree, like, hey, I'm gonna give you some apples, will give me some oranges. Or do you want some third party to be like, make sure you tax both of these guys and make sure that I see everything that's happening, Do you want that third party there? I think most people don't want that third party there in their life. It's just a stress. It gets in the way. I talk to a lot of people in medicine. It's the same deal. It's like they want to have a medical practice. They want to help people with healing their life and their body, but they're constantly being limited by the government of what they can do with their own practice. It's like, is the government now the doctor? Is the government supposed to be my medical physician? I mean, you look at on TV, all these politicians think they know what, everything about health, and that they get to decide for everybody else what they should do with their own body, with their own health. Is that not a claim of ownership over other people's health? And you say, well, it's for the greater good. It's because people don't understand it, or it's because of the experts. How can we make a justification for slavery? And this is what I see a lot of the time. And it is just, again, history on a cycle, a repeat. We saw this in the 1800s, people making justifications for slavery, whether it be through religion or politics or economics, and they just want to get away from the moral situation, right? Because when they're confronted with morality, is it right to own a slave, to claim ownership over their property? It's like, no. And what is a slave's property? Themselves, their own body, their life, their freedom. Their freedom is a form of property. And in order to have control over your piece of property, think of it like a car, right? Like you have a car that you have to keep responsibility over. If you're not responsible for your own car, how is your car going to end up? It might not end up so well. You're not taking care of it, just like anything else that you own. So the same thing with your body. If you're going to own your body, you got to prove it to others that you own your body. You got to take care of it. You got to keep it in good health, good condition, and your body will reward you for doing that. And the same thing with your freedom. You have to be responsible for your freedom. So essentially, you have the right to freedom. Freedom is a natural condition. Nobody comes out of the womb with somebody saying, hey, you're a slave, like naturally. No, they have to impose that condition. That's a man-made condition imposed upon them. Like, here, make sure to sign this birth certificate. Let's chain them up. You're automatically a slave because you're born in the slave family. Mm-hmm. This is how it was back then, and it still is today, just in, like I said, with the birth certificate and other things. But people feel like they're basically in debt, in servitude to the government, this person that they barely even know. And then they make it feel like, oh yeah, I know this person. I see them on TV. They sound like me. They relate to me. That doesn't legitimize the act. Even if you are convinced of your own enslavement, you're convinced like this person should rule over me. He's going to have the best things. He's going to steal from everybody else to provide for me. How egotistical, number one, is that? And number two, it's like, it just doesn't make sense in reality. You have to create a lot of man-made conditions to justify something that everybody soon thinks is natural. A lot of people think government is natural, like we can't live without it, because they were born into a system where they can't imagine a reality without it. They've never truly embraced freedom, so of course they're going to fear freedom. And if they fear freedom because of the possible chaos that will happen within, how are they responsible for their freedom? Freedom requires responsibility, because there is going to be some problems. If I see somebody harming somebody else, am I just going to stand there and do nothing? Like, oh yeah, this guy's just going to hurt someone, I'm just going to let it happen. Maybe if there's a police force that I feel like has to handle all my issues for me, but in a world where we're responsible and obligated to be responsible, I'm probably going to want to help that person, and I probably should. Why not have the obligation to be responsible, and why not be responsible to be free? This is the big notion. You can't just get rid of government. You can't just get rid of slavery. You can't just create anarchy out of nowhere. It comes naturally as the result of people owning themselves and showing that they own themselves.
100%.
That's the only way you achieve actual freedom. You cannot be like, okay, let's just get rid of everything. It's not going to work. It'll just grow back into another system, because the belief system of statism, which I call mental slavery, still exists. It's going to inevitably result in physical slavery, which you can say is government.
And it's amazing how the people that, and I know exactly what you're saying, because I'll talk to people about this very issue, and they'll say, so you want to abolish all government? And then their immediate thing is that it's kind of shocking how they really defend their slavery and the government. Like it's kind of shocking when you see what's going on, and it was very jarring for me how some people are quite happy with their chains. I say, like, they're happy to think the government's doing a great job, and which just boggles my brain when I think about it. And I try to talk to them, but they always go to that, like, okay, so then, and they think it's gonna, like, I mean, it's gonna happen overnight. Like, okay, so all of a sudden you're gonna wake up and there's no government, and then they immediately go to, well, then there's going to be anarchy in the world. It's going to be chaotic. It's going to be Mad Max. It's going to turn into anarchy. And then this is a great point because you brought up anarchy. I always correct them, and they don't even really know what the true definition of anarchy is, because if they think that anarchy means that, what they think it, like Hollywood portrays, that it's just chaos run amok in Mad Max, they don't even know the true meaning of the word. So can you let people know, like, what their true meaning of anarchy is?
Yeah, so anarchy just means anarchon, which means no rulers. It doesn't mean no rule. Doesn't mean no rules. So there
Right.
still are rules, and people are going to make rules all the time. I have at my own house, right? There's rules if you want to come in my house. Like, okay,
Yep.
I need to probably know you first, which is the
That's a
obvious
good,
thing. That would be nice. If I run a business, it's like, yeah, I want some strangers walking in, but it's also my business, so I got to make sure I treat it like a business. And make sure that there's some rules to make sure it runs properly. Otherwise, it's all just not going to work properly.
Right.
And I can't have like unnatural expectations for people to do things that are just not natural, right? Like to be, addressed a certain way and such. Like, people should always have ownership over their life, their property, because that's just natural. Like, it's not some sort of anarcho-capitalist, blah, blah, blah perspective that you want to label it. It's just basic ownership, basic idea of property. Otherwise, you really have no such thing. So, and like I said, that's freedom, is being responsible for it, knowing what it is, knowing what it entails. Yes, it involves chaos. Yes, it involves wrongdoing. You can't take that out of existence. There's always going to be criminals. There's always going to be bad people.
That's what I say, yeah.
But the question is, this is the biggest question, is how do you manifest evil? How do you grow evil? And that can only happen when there's a system that adds legitimacy to that evil. So if everybody thinks that this evil doing is right to exist, that is how it becomes, a system of slavery. Because slavery will always exist in some small form. If I'm saying every wrongdoing will always exist in some wrong form, and violence, etc. The question is, how does that grow? Yes, it happens due to ignorance. It happens due to fear. It happens due to permissibility. Like, people just letting it happen. Like, okay, this cop is doing something wrong, but because he's a cop, I'll let it happen.
Exactly.
Whereas if it's another person who's not wearing a fancy badge and uniform, is not a respected authority, and they're doing the same exact action as the cop, they are seen as, criminal, they're bad, get rid of them. Even though it's the same action across both people. So why aren't we looking at the action? Why are we looking at the individual and their titles and statutes and their uniforms? Why does that matter to us? And that's where the line is drawn. Is who is legitimizing slavery and who is not.
Right. That's 100%, and it's true, right? And then it's so, what I've noticed, and especially I was telling you off air over what got me really active in starting to speak out and wanting to do this the great work, is that over the last couple of years with COVID, I really saw the number that the social engineers have done on people in general, like as an aggregate, like just how over the last couple of years people just fell in line with whatever, as you were touching on, you have people in the government telling you about your health and what you should be doing. They have no knowledge of this. They're just repeating what they're told by somebody else. But the fact that people fell for this so quickly and barely without a fight, and at least I only speak from what I've seen it in my area, people just kind of rolled over and didn't even put up a fight. They didn't resist at all, and some still in the area that I live, we've had our mask mandates lifted now for a couple months, and there's actually a group, and I keep saying this because it just shocks me that there's a group still in my area trying to get these mandates brought back. They want the vaccine passports brought back. They want the mask mandates brought back. They want the social distancing. It's crazy. And they are like really trying to get this put through. And I'm just very shocked about that. And what upsets me, Cory, is that I think the reason that what gets me upset is that people are giving away their rights and their freedoms. And a lot of people don't even know what a right is by definition.
Mm-hmm.
So if they don't even know the definition, what the definition of the word is, it's very easy to give up something if you don't even know what it is you're giving up, is what I hope I worded that good. I'm
Yeah,
trying.
they don't have to necessarily define right and wrong either, because there's different ways you can interpret this. The same words, the same concepts per se, right?
Hmm.
Because I can say a right doing is something that doesn't violate nature, doesn't violate ownership, it doesn't
Yep.
violate responsibility. I can go through, I could say it doesn't create a victim. It doesn't. It's not a form of theft. I can literally go on and on all day. The
Yep.
point is like if you have a general picture that yeah, it's just not doing harm. It's not causing any disturbance. Like I said, in that sort of natural order of everyday social interaction for the desires of few or one person. You start to realize that yeah, you got to feel the vibe of the room. You gotta feel it out. You gotta understand people's psychology. This is all learning process. Our reason ever develops. So our understanding of right and wrong is always going to develop as time moves on. And this should be something that the human species should generally know by now, right? Like I said, people, if I ask them, like, are you going to chain somebody up and call them a slave? Like, no, they're going to see that as wrong. Why
Yep.
is that? Because they have something within themselves that recognizes that it's wrong. Not necessarily because they were taught by the school system that slavery was ended for so and so reasons. It's because they understand that they don't want to be in that position themselves, right?
Exactly.
Like
Yep.
they put their hand on the hot burner and they realize it hurts them. They're like, I don't want that to happen to somebody else. I better educate them and tell them what the effects of their behavior is going to be. So that's
Right.
essentially, what is right and wrong in a nutshell. But some people want to stick with their very strict definitions. I don't want to give a strict definition because I want to appeal to the everyday person. If you have a general sense of morality, all you need to know is that authority and government seeks to be an exemption to that morality.
Oh, for sure.
That's the biggest key here,
Yep.
because like I said, when somebody who in an authority figure is taking the same action as somebody else who isn't, they're seen totally different from the person who isn't an authority figure. And that this right there is, like I said, where the line is drawn. So what gives somebody the right to perform a wrong action that everybody else would say is wrong and anybody else did is wrong? What
Yep.
gives them the right to do it? And why should they have more rights than the other people? That assumes they are the slave master and that they
Yep.
have slaves below them that they get to coerce and compel under their own will. So really, the only thing you need to define in reality, aside from right and wrong, you can go through, like I said, through many different means. I like to just cut right to the chase. What is slavery? It's the involuntary servitude of another person's labor to another. It's the claim of ownership of somebody's life and property. If you can understand that, it's over. And that's why I wrote a whole book about it, but the book is really small and simple and easy to understand. In fact, more than half of it is quotes from former abolitionists, because the abolitionists of the 1800s who ended chattel slavery also understood basic understandings of right and wrong. That's what compelled them to want to free the slaves, right? So in the first place, and they were the ones who were like, this needs to happen. They created their own newspapers. They did all this fancy stuff. And essentially, are we not doing the same thing? we're creating our own shows. We're creating our newspapers to try to educate the public about something happening. Now,
Right.
can the government step in and try to act like the victor like they did in the 1800s? Well, for this, not so much, because now we're tackling the very system itself that created slavery and ever maintained slavery in the first place. If you go back to the very roots of government, you see Samaria was the first form of government, the oldest form of government, and yet also, coincidentally, just so happens to be the first form of systemic slavery. Maybe, it totally has nothing to do with the fact that you're creating a class system where certain people have more rights than others, where, there's this monopoly on violence, coercing other people and telling them what to do with their lives. Totally has nothing to do with that. And of course, their law codes try to appeal to their great intelligence. Like, they have their law codes and they're like, we're here to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. Meanwhile, they hold slaves.
Yeah.
And they're having a class system that is literally doing exactly that. Like, this has gone on for 4,000 to 5,000 years. So when people think government is natural, it's like, then you look at how long human beings have been on Earth, like 300,000. Sorry, it's not the same. We've been convinced into an imposed system that is a belief system that has existed for quite some time, and that belief system is called statism. That is what should be the focus, not natural law, not morality. You can get to the same conclusions if you go through those routes, but you don't have to. That is what I want to stress, is like, you don't have to fall into your echo chambers or your certain ways of thinking to achieve the same understanding. If we're looking at something that is universal, that everybody can understand, that is really common sense, because is it hard to understand that you own yourself? Is it hard to understand that you shouldn't steal from somebody else, even if you write it on a fancy piece of paper, even if you get other people to do it for you? It's still the same action. Is that really hard to understand? But see, because we have all those layers, all those masks to the action, it somehow makes it seem legitimate to us. So like, we'll say theft is taxation instead. We'll call it that. And then somehow everybody will not think it's theft anymore. See, but yet it's still the same action. This, again, is the legitimization of wrongdoing. And what you happen when you allow any evil, right? It doesn't matter how big the evil is, whether it's a great evil or less evil, whatever you want to call it. If it's any evil, why should we allow it? Because that's how it grows, when we allow an evil. So what is slavery ultimately? It is really crime guaranteed and repeated. Because a slave master, once they have you as a slave, they can do anything to you. They can rob you. They claim ownership over you. They repeatedly, guaranteed. So slavery is the greatest of all evil, and it's the evil that, if you get rid of, will provide the most amount of freedom. And how do you get rid of it? Again, education. You can't expect to do it through politics. The abolitionists, guess what? They didn't free the slaves through politics. In fact, they didn't participate in any elections. They didn't hold any office chairs. A lot of people don't know this. A lot of them were anarchists. Okay, and that's why I just want to use the word abolitionist, because it just gets to the heart of the matter. If you say anarchist, people are going to think some sort of political ideology. Are you anarcho this, anarcho that? Again, I'm talking about morality. I'm talking about an action. We're abolishing something that's an action. Okay, we're abolishing. That's an action. It's not an ideology. It's not a doctrine. I'm not trying to convince anybody to believe what I want to believe, because heck, I mean, in a free world, nobody's beliefs get to be imposed upon anybody else's. That's the whole point of a free world. So why should I be here like, I know everything about this subject, I want you all to believe me? Like, I'm asking for a world where people can think for themselves, where nobody's will is being imposed upon another. That's it.
Exactly.
So if you...
Perfect. And I'm just checking the time, Cory. I don't want to cut you off, but we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I know a break music's going to be coming up. But just to let everyone know that after the break, we will be covering. We have Cory Edmond here. We're covering a lot of great topics, and going to be covering a lot more in the second hour, guys. So I hope you guys stick around, because we're going to be covering. I want to talk to Cory about veganism, about religion. A lot of great topics that I still want to cover, and hotbed topics that I found out the hard way. A lot of this is even with conscious parenting, and that it's definitely topics that get people's feathers ruffled up pretty quickly. So I hope you guys stick around. Definitely looking forward to the second hour, guys. So please go have a stretch, make a coffee, take a break, do whatever it is that you need to do, and we will be back very shortly for the second hour. Stick around, guys. Welcome back, everybody. We are back for the second hour of Crypt Ricks. I've been thinking, want to say hello to everybody in chat. I forgot to say that at the beginning, guys. I do apologize. I do really enjoy looking at the chat and interacting with you guys. A lot of great people in the chat who are definitely hungry for the knowledge, that's for sure. So that's a great thing to see. Just to let everybody know, I do have my guest here, an amazing guest, Cory Edmond, and you can find his work on the One Great Work Network. Along with a lot of other great creators. I think there's like 60 of them on there now. They're all covering amazing, important topics, a lot of the stuff that we're covering here. So guys, definitely check that out. You're going to find a lot of great information there. That's definitely going to get you thinking, and I think teach you a lot. So please check that out, the One Great Work Network. And he also does have a live show that he does every Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I don't also want to just let everybody know he is the author also of two books, one, Slavery Gone for Good, and the second one, Modern Abolitionism and the Wisdom of Nature. So I'm going to get at the end of the show, I'll make sure he lets everybody know about these things, where you can his books, where you can pick them up, or any of the other information he'd like to pass on, so you guys can start checking out his work. Definitely worth your time. So welcome back, Cory.
Hi, how's it going?
Perfect. I'm great. I got to stretch a little bit, and so I definitely ready for the second hour. That first hour flew by, like amazing information that you are letting people listen and take in. So that I really appreciate you for being here. The one we have so many topics that we can cover. I wish we could
Sure.
go into depth for them all, like really go into depth. And but that's where I would tell people to go and check out your work on the One Great Work Network and other places where you're putting out your content, because then you definitely, as you said, dive deeper into it on
Yeah.
these topics. Now, I was telling you when we were talking off air yesterday, the one topic that I find is a hotbed one when I start talking to people is a veganism. And there is definitely, I found two sides that are hard stances where it's the full, that's the way to go. It's the only way to go. And then I have other people on the other side saying that's not the way to go. And it's crazy that, people actually think it's a good thing. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that and your stance on it.
Sure. So
It's a hot one. I know that.
yeah, for sure. Not sure why, because to be honest, it's just another way of eating. I've studied
I
over
agree.
150 different diets because I'm a health coach, and veganism is just one of them to me. It's among a lot of other diets. Unfortunately, it's not always seen as a diet. More so, it's more of a religious ideology. And the reason why I say religious is because most of the time when people go vegan, they're not doing it for health purposes originally. They're doing it for moral purposes or some other purpose. So that's in their own words, right? Most vegans are doing it because of the animals or the environment, etc. And I understand they have good intentions, and I completely agree, in fact, with a lot of what they say. But it's what they do that I controvert and say, well, not necessarily. Why does there have to be one way of eating that is considered moral? Since when is there ever one really answer for everything other than nature itself, which nature comprises of many answers, and it depends on many different environments. If I'm living in the Arctic, how am I going to get vitamin D? Could any vegan please give me the answer to that? The only way you get it is through fish. Otherwise, you have to do supplementation with man-made supplements, and that's an issue because now you're depending on some man-made material. Now, if that allows us to get vitamin D, okay, but then let's look at the forms of vitamin D that you do get, which, by the way, it's like super expensive to get some like fancy mushroom extract for vitamin D. And it's not entirely easy to reproduce, but let's say we do get that plant-based version. What form of it are we getting, and how much of it are we getting? And still, it's totally impractical. And don't you think that if something is true, it would have some sort of basis in nature? Like we talk about natural law. A lot of people use that as a justification for veganism, yet they completely forget about nature in general, which is the root to all natural law. So I find a lot of the arguments hypocritical, and a lot of the arguments just simply don't make sense logically when you break them down, such as if an alien came down to Earth and saw that humans were eating animals, that justifies them eating humans. No, if they were morally and consciously more advanced than humans, they would know better than humans not to eat the humans, would they not? And if we're both in the capacity for reason, to reason with one another, why would we eat one another? And this is the same reason why, we don't eat other humans, cannibalism.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's a psychological part, and it just doesn't work out with our nature. So you have to add in all the factors, and this is why it's such a loaded topic and why so many people are so heated about it, especially since it becomes their worldview. They embrace it. This is my way of eating, my way or the highway, like anything else. They feel like this is something that they should do with their life. They become part of the identity. Maybe they create YouTube channels. Maybe they're like, I'm posting fancy videos. I'm making all these cool meals. And meanwhile, I could probably just eat one piece of raw liver and get more nutrition than they get in a month. But regardless, they might be proud of it, and it might reinforce their religion. Now, what is a religion? It's something that can either bring people together, or it's something that can hold them back, something that is warping their mental.
That's the definition of the word.
Yeah, religare means to hold back, thwart from forward progress. Or you can look at religio, which means to reconnect. I mean, there's different forms of it. The point is that religion can be that thing that you were just attached to. Your mind is just seeing a limited worldview. And by definition, any diet is a religion because you're restricting certain foods. And you're telling yourself, or your mind, to your body, that you should not be eating a certain food. Your body's not necessarily telling you what you should or should not eat. You're not listening to your own body. You're listening to the religion of other people who are perhaps teaching veganism, or other people who are teaching these diets. And you're saying, well, yeah, they convinced me. They showed me enough studies. They're doing it themselves. So that somehow justifies me doing it. Or I can apply this moral doctrine to veganism when I don't even evaluate human rights in relation to human rights. Animal rights, versus human rights is something that you can surely discuss. But like, I have a whole 1 hour and 30-minute script that I wrote for my anti-vegan video, which again is not anti-vegan. It's more so anti-diet, anti-religion, and anything can be a religion. It can be taken as such if you allow it to limit your worldview and not open up the possibilities, not listen to your own body, and not find out what works for you. Because veganism can surely work for people. Does that mean it's natural? Does that mean it's long-term? These are other questions. I can do any diet healthy if I know how to do that diet. And I can surely feel a lot of benefits if I'm getting off the standard American diet because of how bad it is, or any diet that is super bad. Of course, if I'm going to transition to anything else, it's going to be like, oh yeah, man, this diet is fantastic. It doesn't make the diet somehow justified or natural for my own biochemistry. There's more to look at than just, black and white for diet, because everybody lives in different environments. Everybody comes from different cultures. Everybody had different ancestors. But there is something. We are one species. Does any other species in nature, like, eat different foods like we do? Do they cook with fancy spices and mine things deep out of the earth to try to season their food? I mean, this is why we're so confused in health. It's because we have all these different varieties of foods and spices. Like,
for sure.
No wonder why we're confused. And then we have transport across the world, eating foods that aren't locally grown or seasonally grown in our own area. And then, I wonder what harm that does to the environment as well. You can go into morality and you can go into the natural arguments, and both don't line up. So that's why my video is titled Veganism is Unnatural and Immoral. It's both.
Yeah.
If I just address simple questions like the one I said about the Arctic, it's just really hard for any vegan to dispute, and they have to somehow justify it through man-made means. It's the only thing they can do, and you know what? That's because most of their diet is man-made. If you look at all the fruits and vegetables that they consume, they never existed until like a couple hundred years ago, when we had all this mass agriculture that's starting to deplete all our soils and have runoff going into the waters, and they don't account for all those deaths. No, because it's easy to film a slaughterhouse of animals getting killed, and let's start blaming the local farmers who have their own cattle, even though in freedom, that's what everybody's going to do. In a free world, people are going to have their own animals. They're going to have cattle, and this is just the reality of it. Veganism is not going to go anywhere, and if anything, it's just a distraction from realizing that human slavery still exists. If they're trying to apply it to animals, I respect them, because yes, we do mistreat animals.
That's the one I hear about the most when I get into this topic, is that I'm an advocate for hurting animals and the abuse of animals, and I do get their argument 100%. I see it, but I'm like you. It's not so black and white. You're in the gray areas, and because I was telling you off air also that I have hunter friends that are hunters, and they are some of the biggest protectors of nature and for animals in general. Like, it's like, and I have to admit, years ago I was dead against hunters in general. I remember meeting a friend who's a great friend of mine now, and when I first met him, and I was just getting to know him because he was a neighbor of mine, and I found out he was a hunter. I almost did become friends with him, but I was open and upfront with him. I wanted to have a discussion, because I told him, I said, I'm very uncomfortable with you being a hunter. I don't believe in hurting animals. But see, this is a whole other topic I could talk about for 2 hours. But in general, that was the discussion I had with him. And he asked me, he said, please sit down with me for 1 hour, because you got this wrong idea of hunters. Because I was like, they kill everything and they don't care, and it's all about trophies and that. And he was like, whoa, like, can you just give me an hour? Let me talk to you. And then
life and death has to be embraced as part of nature.
Yes.
We should not be afraid of it.
And he just broke down what hunters actually do, and how they, done properly, that they they do care about nature and that. So I get the argument on both sides. I really do, guys. It's a tough one, and I found that out the hard way by talking to people, that people get really heated. So what do
They
you
can check
like?
out my
What?
video. They could do their own
Yeah,
research. I'm not telling them what to think. They can think for
exactly.
themselves. I'm not like, this is not the government where I'm forcing you by gunpoint to do something against your
Yeah.
own will. You have your own decision, and you always will, for your own health. So that's why, to me, it's not as important as statism, because statism is the scenario where you have certain people's wills being imposed upon others. And I even, talked to Mark Passio in an interview I did with him on veganism, because he's somebody who promotes veganism through
Yes.
morality. And he's like, yeah, statism is more important to focus on. We need to free humans from slavery first. That's what he said to me.
Yep. And that's 100% true.
Yeah.
Very, very true.
And, again, like flat earth, people can see that as a religion. Anything could be taken as a religion if it restricts your worldview. I just want to repeat that point. Now, let's say a mother can't produce breast milk for her baby, which, first of all, is not vegan by definition. It contains cholesterol, tons of fats, everything that vegans will say causes heart attacks, even though there's no evidence. And I'm gonna blatantly say that because, again, I studied nutrition, which a lot of people who also talk about morality, such as myself, but other people, they haven't studied nutrition either. So I'm gonna firmly say it, especially, again, since I have videos on this. If people want to do their own research, I encourage them to. I'm not I'm not like some authority on any subject. I'm just a fellow human being sharing a perspective. Of course, I'm going to have knowledge behind what I believe in. So, but I'm going to have knowledge. That doesn't make it a belief. And connecting with nature is something that, like, none of us do, even myself included, not enough. Not as much as at least we used to, especially. And if people want to expand human consciousness, they want to expand the human brain, what's a better way than getting all the nutrients that you need for living? And literally, you can eat any single animal organ or piece of meat and get more nutrition than any plant food. By the way, particularly raw, because cooked meat is not necessarily natural. By any stretch of the imagination. People always forget about raw animal products. In most nutrition schools, all the ones that I took, not a single one of them talked about raw animal products. It's probably one of the most censored topics in health.
Really?
And yet we're talking about veganism as if it's some sort of solution, yet it's promoted by the UN and all these big corporations. Raw animal products heal people. And this is the most healing food you could ever consume, the most easy to digest. You have no problems. They digest within sometimes minutes. You look at like a raw egg, easiest food to digest, contains every nutrient you need. When you start cooking it, you lose like over 50% of the protein, all the nutrients, most of it is destroyed, and this goes for any food out there. And for plants in the first place, when you have all these tough fibers that you have to digest through, it's like you gotta cook it in order to eat it half the time.
And then
like
you
I said,
cook out
some
a
of
lot
these
of the
plants,
vitamins and stuff when you cook it.
and these plants haven't even existed, like I said, until recently when people started creating all the agriculture, which also coincidentally started at the same exact time as the first government, the first form of slavery, the Sumerian Empire. Is it a coincidence that, we start to decline in our health at the same time as becoming slaves, at the same time as, supposedly creating civilization? Yeah, you mean organized civilization, governments. But yes, these are things that we cannot ignore. If a mother can't produce breast milk, they have to do raw milk. It's the only best alternative to that. I mean, you can look at baby formula. I mean, come on. Are we going to justify the man-made for the natural, which is supposed to be natural? And why is the mother not producing breast milk is another question. And pregnancy alone is enough evidence for anybody to realize that veganism is not something that they should do. Their body's constantly craving fats and proteins, and plants don't have fats. They have oils. And those oils, they're blocked by anti-nutrients. They have cellulose. Fiber blocks the nutrients as well, causes bloating. It's a prebiotic, no probiotics, no bacteria. The cholesterol is necessary for all your hormones. You can't even produce vitamin D without it. I mean, you literally need animal nutrients. There's over like 20 different nutrients you can't get from plants at all. And then keep that in account with the anti-nutrients, with the cellulose, with the fiber, in addition to if you cook it, and if it's exported across the world, if it's not fresh, if it's processed. And soon you end up with basically no nutrients, including the nutrient depletion in the soils. Like soon you
That's
literally end up
yes.
with nothing.
I when I started, I've been laughing and kind of joking with people that I talk have on my show that over the last like 3 months I'm becoming a soil expert, which was totally unexpected. But I started hearing rumbles about underground, like kind of it was kind of weird how it just kind of came to me in a way. Learning about our soil and big pharma, like not big pharma, big farming or mass farming, and how bad our soil is and
Yeah.
how like the one example I heard was like if you want to eat like even an apple that you ate even 20 years ago to get the same amount of vitamins and minerals and
Hmm.
stuff that you got from that apple 20 years ago, you'd have to eat 7 or 8 apples now
Yeah.
because of there's no real yeah, you can get vegetables and fruit and all of that at the grocery store, but there's no real nutrition in it. And when you start looking in the soil and what they've done and how they've been farming on this same soil for over 200 years without letting the soil recover, and they just keep throwing chemicals on it, we could be in a serious problem, Corey, in a few years with our just
We need
food. Like
animals.
yes,
Not
yes, I mean,
consuming them, but on the farmland as well. Regenerative
yes,
agriculture.
yep. And it's something I think people, and how many people think about dirt? I mean, I never really honestly did, like, other than when in my gardens and stuff, but I never really looked into it. And I think people should, I recommend that people do start looking into it because it's a topic that when you start looking into it is simple. You think dirt and you don't really think much of it. When you dive into it, there is problems. And so it's really shocking how we could have all this food maybe on our shelves in a few years, but there's going to be no nutritional value in it.
Yeah, and that's the one of the main issues. Like, if we want to expand consciousness, if we want to help humanity in many different ways, and there's so many other things I could say among the points that you mentioned, but like they're all in my scripted video, so I
Yep.
recommend people check it out. This idea of giving and getting, the animals providing for us just as we provide for them, the way it's
Yep.
been done for, well, since humans' first existence. Not 5,000 years ago, like government first started. No,
Yeah.
300,000 years ago, which
Very
helped with the
true.
formation of our brains and everything else. Um, so definitely essential. Like, we wouldn't even be probably talking about natural law itself if it weren't for all these nutrients that we got through animal products, which is just quite ironic and funny to
I
me within itself.
I agree. And what's scary too is a lot, as you were saying at the start of when we start talking about veganism, a lot of people just do it because they think it's the right thing to do, and then not realizing that if you are going to go down that path, you have to know what you're doing. Like you can't just. I think people think veganism. A lot of people, you just eat rough like salads and some fruit and stuff like that. But when I was looking into it, you really have to know what you're doing if you're going to do it properly. It's not something you can just do like make your
Yeah,
mind up one day and go I'm a vegan and then you just start your body's gonna like crash like this is
yeah,
something you have to get educated on
I agree.
and
Juicing,
yes, yeah.
smoothies, super
So why
important.
yeah, and I think that there is a somewhere where both can meet in a positive way where
Yeah,
we get the like do it properly with animals. I'm not for abusing animals in any way, guys. I am not,
right.
trust me. But is there a way that we can meet in the middle where it's
Hmm.
a common ground? And that's the discussion I like to have. So
Yeah,
I
like I
think,
said, giving and getting, this natural process of life and death, and animals giving to us as we give to them and provide them with their essential shelters. I mean, there's a reason why we use cows and chickens instead of other animals, and it's because they're good for the environment. They're good for so many reasons. In India, they've always blessed cows, and they're like, oh my gosh, it's holy and sacred. They use ghee medicinally. It's basically just butter without any of the sugars that are hard to digest. It's
yep,
literally just pure fat, and they consider that medicinal, and it heals the body. I use it instead of butter all the time, and you can get it grass fed. They sell it at a lot of stores now. It's good. There's a lot of appeal though in the stores, especially over the last 5 years. I've noticed drastic changes within the stores. They're appealing to gluten-free, vegan,
that's true. Yep,
organic, and those don't ensure necessarily that there's nutrients. Even grass-fed doesn't ensure that it's actually grass-fed. I mean,
hmm,
so just be aware of these things. It's better to connect with the food and understand it yourself. Maybe meet your local farmers and talk with them. I mean, what better could you do than
I was
that?
going to just suggest that. You're right. But the problem, we're at least in my area though, Corey, is that if you want to buy raw products off the farmers. They've made, of course, they put a law in that's against the law to do that, and so that should be the first flag is when the government doesn't want you, kind of doing this and going that route. But I mean, you can get in a lot of trouble, at least where I live, if you try to buy like raw milk off a
Yeah,
farmer or eggs or
it's
anything. They're
illegal.
really, yeah, they're making it very difficult.
Raw milk has been illegal for so long in different states. Like it still is, and it's astonishing to me that something so natural can be illegal, and that's why
Yep.
I need to look at it. That's why people need to look at it instead of having this debate about veganism. It's like this is something that's clearly illegal that they don't want you drinking. You look at any old-fashioned health book, and it's like raw milk is like
That's what
cures
I was taught.
everything.
Yep.
And yet, if you look at pasteurized dairy and look at the studies nowadays, it's like it causes cancer, like the complete opposite effects of raw dairy. That's the power of cooking. Some people go as far to believe that all modern disease occurred when pasteurization started, when we
Yep.
started heating up everything. Like everything overseas has to be heated up. Everything needs to just go through extreme heat temperatures, and we're all conditioned to always cooking our food. And it's something that you grow more conscious of. If you just anybody who does juicing or smoothies should notice immediately that they get a lot more energy through raw foods.
Oh,
They
for
also
sure.
they
Yes.
also like just in general, provide more nutrients. Even if you're doing smoothies with vegetables and fruits, you're helping break down the fibers, making it a little bit easier to digest. There's a lot of things you can go into. I actually have a health book that I started in 2018 that I never released, and
Oh, you should for sure.
I'm going to consider releasing it. It's just the only issue is it's like over 600 pages and it requires a lot of review. For me, health is very picky. I want to make sure that it would be pretty perfect, and as it is, I already have 100 other projects going on. So, I as much as I want to get it out there, and I have like fancy smancy figurative diagrams and such, I don't think it's necessarily the most important either. Like I want people to look at government and slavery and just basic freedoms. Like there's a reason why I stopped doing my health coaching practice. And I'm still passionate about health, of course, but what am I really passionate about? I'm passionate about
Right.
freedom. If somebody takes self-control of their own health, they're freeing their own health, their own body. The same way as if somebody frees their own mind when it comes to politics, they're freeing their own body from slavery in both ways. So it's to me, it's always been about really freedom, because
Right.
that's what it's always come down to, at least within my own introspection.
I agree. I totally agree with what you're saying, and it kind of feed off of each other. Once you start addressing that, we deal with those issues. It all kind of come together. I think but we have to first deal with the most pressing issues, which is like you were saying, slavery, and that we have to
Mhm.
get through that before we start trying to do other things. And I think so. You got to find the most important place that we have to work on and get fixed before we start moving on. I think that's a great point. The one thing that I'm just checking my bullet points. The one
Yeah,
thing that I want to talk to you about too was you want to talk about natural intelligence versus artificial intelligence, and I just want you to get your thoughts and what you mean by that, because I think this is another thing I talk about a lot too. Is I've had people on talking about conscious parenting, and that's how we kind of came across this topic when we were talking. And I was saying that I see at a younger and younger age that parents are letting phones and tablets and uh, that sort raise their kids. It's kind of becoming a babysitter, and I know people that I see this happening and people around me. So I wanted to get that's how we kind of got onto this topic, and I'd like to get your thoughts on that, on natural intelligence versus artificial intelligence.
sure. Well, I can use a little example tying into our previous topic. With us talking about health, when we understand the body and how it works, we're ultimately gaining an intelligence of that body and understanding the
Mm-hmm.
intelligence of the body. So we're not only obtaining intelligence for ourselves, but recognizing the inherent intelligence within the universe at the same time. That's how we obtain intelligence, is by seeking that intelligence to begin with.
Right.
So, for example, I'm drinking water, but not just regular water. I'm drinking water with fulvic minerals in it, and somebody can look into this. If they're not getting enough nutrients, they don't eat organs. They might want to go get fulvic minerals because it provides all the minerals they need. They can add to their water. It's coming from a natural source. That's an example of what I would call naturalization in my second book, Wisdom of Nature, which is learning from natures to understand what those natures require. what is natural to those natures, essentially. And so if they require minerals and there's a natural way of us getting those minerals, of course the most natural way would be organs or other means. But if you can't, then the fulvic minerals would be a good general option. But you always have that intelligence, that mind, that you recognize that there might be something more natural than that. And that is, of course, recognizing the natural from the unnatural, which is a huge theme within that book, which you can define. And I go as far as to make a big claim to say that what is natural is what is right and what is healthy. And you can equate natural to reality, or nature to reality. And so what's real is what promotes reality. What is natural is what promotes nature. I make these connections very clear. Now, a lot of philosophers would be like, you're making the appeal to nature fallacy. You can't do that. You're making the naturalistic fallacy. And they start giving me the whole shebang that they were taught to read off their little script that they heard of in school. And I have a whole video addressing that, of course, too, but the book kind of essentially debunks that whole notion of the appeal to nature. Since when is appealing to nature considered a bad thing or something we shouldn't do? Does that then justify humans being God? Does that then justify us doing whatever we want to nature? No, it doesn't. But when we say appeal to nature is a fallacy, we start to make it sound like mankind could do pretty much anything to nature. And that's where I draw the line. I was like, okay, I got to write a book about it. Okay, I got to make a video about it, because I'm here to defend nature. Ultimately, I'm just a messenger.
Me too.
And I don't, like I said, I don't claim to be the authority of nature. Nobody can be. It's recognizing that very nature within itself that helps us understand nature. So that is natural intelligence, is realizing there's an intelligence beyond your own intelligence that we're seeking to understand. And that intelligence is greater than any intelligence that we can create or we have. So if we create something called artificial intelligence, it's always going to be trivial to natural intelligence, for natural intelligence was what allowed us to create artificial intelligence in the first place.
That's very true.
If you look up natural intelligence versus unnatural intelligence or artificial intelligence, you'll get my video documentary on it. It's almost about 2 hours, I think. And I produced this one a couple months back, but it goes over a lot of different points about natural intelligence. But essentially, it's really simple. You learn from nature, and you realize that everything is connected. There's a harmony. There's an order that takes place. And when you recognize that order and you understand it, which requires practice and patience and utilizing your own natural intelligence, like I said, you attain a knowledge that you're destined to have, and that without it, you actually cannot even have artificial intelligence.
Right.
If the human consciousness cannot keep up with human-made intelligence, of artificial intelligence, we will destroy ourselves, ultimately. This is why so many people talk about artificial intelligence, how it's going to destroy the whole world and it's going to end up in nukes and robots taking over, Terminator movie stuff.
Yeah.
And
Elon Musk was a big advocate for that for a lot of years. He was speaking out against AI. A lot of people forget about that. He's not really on the bandwagon as much now, but a few years ago, he was big on warning people about AI and stuff.
Yeah, and yet he's the one creating it, which is interesting.
Well, yeah, that's true.
But yeah, and there's a lot of questions I have about him, but I don't know who he is, so I'm not going to make a lot of statements. And a lot of people just want to say he's this or he's that based off just looking at who funds him. That's not enough for me. He has made a lot of interesting statements that I agree with, and I'd be interested to see how that plays out. But another issue is what happens when he dies, and what happens if he crosses the line. Somebody can easily take him out. If he dies, somebody has to take his throne, and they're not going to act the same way he acts. So either way, you're going to end up with problems. The solution lives in the mass public, where the humans must increase their own natural intelligence, their consciousness, essentially. And Elon has said this. He actually did a whole tweet, I think, that says we need to increase human consciousness because he realizes how important it is. But is he actually doing that? Well, you need to have education of how the machines work, what they serve, what they're actually doing. And so we'll see how things play out because, of course, we're still in early stages of artificial intelligence. But
for sure, yes.
We're very new to all that. That's why my book is going to probably be timeless, and my whole message of nature is the answer is only going to grow more relevant because government is clearly unnatural, slavery is clearly unnatural, and what happens when robots start to take the place of man and robots are taking over everything, it's going to be pretty darn clear that we're away from nature, and it's only going to continue growing in that direction, especially as we become more slavish and forget our connection to nature. Because again, in order to realize our connection of nature, that is to free ourselves to begin with. We wouldn't be free if we don't understand what freedom is. It's a natural thing.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
uh,
And they're definitely trying to further that divide from people to nature. I especially have
yes.
seen that over the last few years with the whole, lockdowns and, just in general, they're keeping people. They're trying to make that disconnect and that gap even further. And I keep trying to tell people that you have to get back to nature. That's where we have to get back to. And they're doing everything in their power to make that divide and that chasm a lot greater than
Uh-huh.
it already is. And I think people have to start realizing that you have to get back to nature, and they don't want it. That's for sure.
It's the same thing though with morality, right? Everybody likes morality, they understand it generally, but it's how
Yep.
you put that into practice. So the same thing with nature. All these people are like, yeah, we need to go back and down to nature. Yeah, I love nature, but yet, like, how much do they actually understand it or put it into practice? This is the whole purpose of my book.
Right.
I admit that I am not necessarily connected to nature. I mean, what am I doing right now? I'm talking, on a technological device. But you can use technology for nature. You can understand what technology is doing to your nature. You can still understand yourself, your own nature. See, when I say nature is the answer, I'm not just saying like go outside, start becoming primitive, and go off the grid. I'm saying you need to know your own nature. You need to know what nature is.
Human nature.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
what is nature if you don't know it? What is any appeal if you don't know what you're actually appealing to? So, like, when people say an appeal to nature is a fallacy, like, what is a fallacy if not an illogical situation? An appeal requires knowledge, any appeal. Otherwise, it's not an appeal. So, of course, an appeal would be in a fallacy if it's missing components.
Yeah, makes
I mean,
sense.
even though Wikipedia claims and says that the appeal to nature fallacy cannot be a fallacy if there's enough knowledge. So I'm like, what's the whole point then of saying it's a fallacy? The fact that so many people say that, what is natural is somehow good, like in the supermarket, right? They look at a product that says 100% natural, so it's like, oh, it must be healthy. Yeah, of course that's a unknowledgeable appeal to nature. But it doesn't mean that they're necessarily wrong. They're picking that product because they assume that it does have more things that are natural. They're not necessarily that they know or that they looked into it or anything like that, or that they know what is natural, what is good. But yes, I'm saying that you can absolutely equate what is natural and what is good. And again, this is my own talking script. You're not going to hear this from anybody else because I think for myself. All these people who want to repeat Mark Passio's talking point of right doing it causes no harm. It's like, I'm sorry, but there's also like 1,000 other natural law teachers going back like 3,000 years. And they also shared a lot of perspectives of the same exact perspective, but in different words. You don't have to use the same exact words. And there's a reason why Mark uses the word natural law. It's like because, and some people think all the natural law people of the past disagree with each other. No, they generally all agree. This is why they all use the same term. And again, this is why we all use the word nature. Like, we have a natural gravitation toward nature. And you're right, we're being kept away from that gravitation. And the more we understand that gravitation, then the more we can apply it. But just saying it is not enough. People realizing that's there, it's the first part. Recognition comes first, but knowledge is then the next part. And then you grow into a new recognition, right? I realize that I own myself, but how much do I realize that? Well, depending on the knowledge that I have, if I gain more knowledge, then I can create an even greater recognition of like, wait, I own myself because of this or because of that. So now my recognition has grown. Recognition, right? You're recognizing the brain. You're allowing your brain to think more and more. The more you recognize and expand your perception, the more you'll be able to see everything in existence, all sides, all angles, all perspectives, and you'll be able then to see the truth more.
Right. Would you, because what you're describing is what I call shadow work,
Okay.
and that's doing the work and that's just what I use. I like that term because I do think that is, if that's what you need to do, is to kind of do that work on yourself. So I kind of say it's shadow work because you're confronting yourself, your beliefs, and all of the things, like why you believe certain things and the things that you kind of lie to yourself about. And I think so. I call that shadow work, which I think is so important to get a strong foundation. Would you say that too, that what you're describing is a form of shadow work?
Um,
Or what are your thoughts on it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, could you define shadow work for what do you define shadow work as, real quick? Like, you give me a
For me,
sentence.
when I think of the way I describe shadow work to people is it's the time that you are quiet with yourself and confronting
Mm,
yourself and asking
yeah.
yourself questions, and just being honest with yourself. That's what probably my key would be to this, is that this is the time that you have to be brutally honest with yourself and address a lot of issues that you, hence why I call it shadow work, stuff that you kind of bury down and don't want to address. And I think it kind of fits in with what you were saying.
Yes. Within my second book, The Wisdom of Nature, as you start to read on and on, you start to realize that understanding nature, which essentially the book is a guide to doing,
Hmm.
um, is a process that you can simplify, a process that you can simply do. Meaning the actions are simple, just so much as the thoughts.
Right.
Once you start gaining enough knowledge, you realize how simple it actually is, even though you gained more knowledge. How is that possible? Well, again, it's because you've seen so many perspectives and you've seen where they come together. It's like looking at all
Right.
the philosophers and all the people who did teach natural law of the past and seeing where they all agreed. It's the same deal, and the Tao Te Ching details as well. That's why I have excerpts of it in that book. I also have excerpts of Nature. It's a writing by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I think that's a great text to talk about nature. And they do the same thing, where they reflect stoicism, transcendentalism, the same practices where you go into nature and you reflect, you think for
Right.
yourself.
That's why I was asking. Right.
And that is a very, very, very good practice. Of course, it will allow you to understand nature even better because now you're just sitting with your own nature, or you're sitting with nature itself.
Right.
So you're in the direct source. Absolutely.
Right. Perfect. Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask you that, just because that's what it reminds me of, was when you were saying that. I was like, that's kind of what I do when I'm sitting outside quiet by myself and asking questions and kind of just getting to know nature, and myself and human nature, all of that kind of fits in. So that's why I wanted to ask you about that, which is amazing. So I can't believe that our hour is almost up, Corey. Wow. It just flies so quickly. I wish and there's more I want to talk about, but I also want to give you at least 10 minutes to let people know I know you have so much going on right now, so I want to give you a good amount of time to let people know what you have going on, where they can find you. I know you have a lot of projects going on, and I want people to start checking out your work. So can you just let people know all about where they can find your work, what you're doing now, what you have planned for the future? That would be amazing.
Yeah, so I'm working on a summit where anybody who's listening out there, you could potentially join if you have any expertise on freedom, ownership. You feel like you have a story to share. I welcome you. I want people to collaborate with me, as I am actually creating a lot of new projects that feature a lot more collaboration rather than my own presentations, my own books. I'm starting to move into the more collaboratory realm because I've wanted to head toward that way anyways.
Amazing.
And yeah, and I think it's just great when we could bring more people together. It's a win-win for everybody. Everybody helps each other. Everybody's presence grows together. Again, this is the need for a movement as well, but it also makes it easier to have a movement because I'll be honest, like I said, nobody even in my own network has been doing some of the things I said, like having my simple flag, which I created for them. I created for everybody to share, to have, and they don't even have to use that exact flag. They can customize it. And so I encourage people to go to nita.one and they can check out the website. And that's the website for the movement, where they can learn about a lot of this knowledge and also act. There's literally two buttons. One says learn and the other says act. So I keep it really simple. And of course, I have video content that's not on the website because, like I said, I created that website for everybody, not just me. I created that for everybody. My own works are separate from the website, and if you just look up Cory Nature's the Answer, you'll get it. If you want to learn about my books, I do have landing pages and introduction videos, so you'll find that online when you look up Cory Nature's the Answer. And
Perfect.
I encourage anybody, to use Nature's the Answer as their motto. Use my flag on their websites, their podcasts, whatever, what have you, to help promote these ideas so we can all be unified in at least something. And I'll maybe share their logos or their symbols if they have anything to share. Like, please, let's collaborate. I want that to happen. So I'm starting a summit. I'm starting an online newspaper after, which is going to be like more long term.
Yeah,
And
that's exciting when you were telling me about that. I think
yeah,
that's something that is not happening enough for sure, is
well,
getting people to do something like that.
it's like I look at the abolitionists of the past, right, and I observe their strategies. So I want to kind of emulate exactly what they did, and that's why I'm creating the Liberator 2. based off of the Liberator One from the 1800s, which was an abolitionist newspaper. Their motto was, our countrymen are all mankind, our country is the world. And that's exactly what we're promoting, is it not?
Yep.
That everybody should be treated equally. We're all human beings, that, God's government or nature, whatever you call it, essentially all the same thing, is above
all have
that
the same rights.
yeah, is above human authority.
Yep.
And that's the reason why we should end slavery. That's the reason why we should understand what slavery is. And I'm telling you, that's all we need to know in order to free ourselves from slavery, is just knowing what slavery is, or knowing how to practice self-ownership. And Larkin Rose puts it perfectly. He's also somebody who doesn't subscribe to the vegan agenda or veganism in general, and has an open mind to it. He's just focusing on what needs to be focused on, which is human slavery, which is statism. And I appreciate his approach because it's very common sense, common-minded, and he's evaluating it at an individual level. He's teaching people how to speak with one another. He's putting out documentaries. Everybody's got their own voice here, and I think it's fantastic. The more we can collaborate, we don't just have to have people in the occult world. We don't have to just have people in the ANCAP world, or whatever other label they want to put themselves onto, or the abolitionist world. But as long as we can all have some sort of central union of ideas and maybe shared symbolism, our impact will just be absolutely
It'll be massive.
greater.
Yeah. It will be. It'll be game changing.
And bring it out to the independent media, the people who don't hear about these ideas, right? There's still a lot of people in independent media who are exposed to anti-statism, people who are promoting politics left and right, still within independent media, but they're free-minded. So they're going to be people who might be more receptive, like I said, or even the common law assemblies. These are action steps. I have a video titled Practical Action Steps Toward Total Freedom. And then I have another video called The 4 Steps Toward Total Freedom. It's not that hard to do. It's just you have to do some configuration within your own life, because I'm not living your life. I can't tell you what you should do. But there's a general direction we have to head. There's a general direction that we all recognize that must be done, which is this human destiny for freedom that we have to follow. If we don't follow, we end up with consequences, chaos, ultimately. So
what we're getting now.
Yes. And so it's a matter of education, not politics, not anything else, but education, just like the abolitionists did in the past. That's why we're doing newspapers and summits, and you're invited. So if you're out there, just look up Cory Nature's the Answer and hook up. If you have any questions, even if you're like starting your own podcast or video channel, I'm willing to help out. Of course, this is something that everybody needs to get involved with.
I agree, and that's the one thing I keep telling people too, is that you're gonna, you have to start turning because they're using technology against us and I say that by the social media and everything, and I keep telling people, like, it's not enough to know this information, and that was kind of a place that I was sitting at for a long time. I was taking in this information as quick as I could, and I still do. I'm hungry for this knowledge, and I want to keep taking it in and in. But you have to also, and this kind of boils back to when we were talking about action, people have to start realizing that you have to learn. And that was always my excuse, was I didn't know how to use a computer. I didn't have a computer like until recently. I didn't know any of the programs. So I had a lot of excuses, and that was one thing that I had to put a stop to and stop making excuses. And I think people have to start stepping up to the plate and showing some courage, and then learning about technology so they can learn it and then get their message out, which is going to add to this whole movement. I think it's so important that if you have this knowledge, you want to get it out there, you have to learn the technology side of it, because that's the world that we live in. And I just think a lot of people stop at the knowledge part and they don't follow through all the way. They don't go to the action step.
Yeah, remember, it's your natural intelligence to understand artificial intelligence.
Yep.
To understand the intelligence beyond artificial intelligence. And it is natural for us to merge with the current world that we live in order to continue living in it. Otherwise, we will succumb to our own fate of ignorance, right, to fear, to misunderstanding, to deception, of course. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Great. Yeah, I just kind of giggling to myself, because that was always my excuse. I just didn't have the technical know-how, and then I realized that I had to start somewhere. And then once you start learning, it's not that bad, guys. It really isn't. There's a learning curve like everything else, but it's not as hard as I was making it out to be. That's for sure. It just, I think a lot of people just have to get started and have the drive to do that. And I really think that what you're doing with the wanting to do the summit and this newspaper and that, I think that's really positive steps. and I think it's going to make a big difference. And because bringing all of everybody together is, I think, the way to go, because I think we're just too scattered right now in a way, and fighting, like we were saying earlier, fighting amongst each other. So
Yeah.
I think that's a great thing, that if we can bring this all together and become one, kind of like
And
one
don't be
voice.
afraid. Don't be afraid to go to political parties or meetings
Right.
or anything like that. Like I said, and if you want and you don't want to expose your identity or yourself or put out stuff yourself, don't worry. I created also sheets that you can share from nita.one as well, nita.one, where you can print up like business cards that will bring people to different events or different knowledge. I mean, there's so much you can do. You can hand out flyers. There's endless amount of ways to share information. I have a lot of videos about it. So I do encourage people put in a little bit of effort. If they care about the world, they have to do something about it. It's better than complaining about the world, right? And just
That's so true.
I mean, I see that a lot. You know, people want to rant or complain to somebody else, and it's like, well, you know, if you put it online, it's universal, it's eternal, it's always out there. At least you're doing something. You're getting it out to maybe people who never heard that knowledge before. Practice makes perfect. Try it. You know, have a podcast. It's easy. You just invite some people on, you know, or maybe have a slideshow, or maybe make a clips channel where you clip this this radio show, or clip somebody else's content if they allow you to. You know, like there's a lot you can do, and that just adds up, and you gain confidence, and you see the numbers, and maybe that inspires you. You know, but you got to have this internal drive, like we said in the beginning. This purpose that you realize that the world is going bad, so you feel like you're morally obligated to do something about it. Don't wait on others. Don't wait on Mark Passo or Cory Endrulat or, you know, or Crypt Rick to put out all the content for you. Produce content alongside us. Get involved. I would love to see it. I love meeting new people. And I think everybody out there, especially people who listen to stuff like this, let's be honest, they're people who have some expertise in something that even if they think they don't, they have certain knowledge that a lot of people could use.
Right, right. And I also tell people too that you don't like, because everybody's got a talent. I always say that. And it doesn't mean that if you want to do the great work, you don't have to do it through, if you don't like public speaking, you don't have to do it that way. You don't have to do it through videos. I like the way that you said there's so many other ways you can get involved. I think people think that you just either have to have a podcast or be all over, you know, a radio show or something like that. But everybody's got talent. So I tell people, you know, maybe you can do it through art. You can do it through poetry. You can do it through music. There's so many different ways that this information can be passed on. And I just hope people realize that you know, there's not just one way to do the great work.
Yes. Be creative. Absolutely.
Yeah. Creative is the way to go, I think. And
which is improvising.
Exactly.
Like,
well, yeah.
You're not necessarily creating from scratch. Like, you're not going to come up with some necessarily genius idea. You look at other people's works, let them inspire you, see who you like, and be like, hey, I want to produce content like that, or maybe I could do it better. You know, maybe I see that they're missing something. Like, these are things to pick up on.
yeah, exactly. And I'm just keeping track of time. I think we got about 5 more minutes. So what I wanted to ask you too, Cory, is what I should have asked you this at the beginning, but what kind of got you started on this journey? Like, how long ago did you start this journey that you're on right now and getting this information out there? Like, what made you start doing this? I'm just curious.
Just curiosity.
Okay, fair enough.
yeah. Honestly, it's a really simple answer. Sorry, I can't go into like some long rant. Like something crazy happened. Like I just asked a lot of questions, and I fell down just the rabbit hole of observation, not even research, but internal research, looking at nature. Like I said, I don't think you necessarily need textbooks or the internet to come to understand your own nature or the nature of ownership or slavery, especially if it's occurring in many different places around us, and that's why we're concerned. It's not hard to look at people's mentalities either and see that the state of the world is a reflection of people's mentalities, the reflection of people's actions, right?
Yep. Yeah, no, that's I figured it like that. It's funny. I just giggled when you said that too, because I've always been a curious person too, like that. So that's kind of how it happened too for me. It's just I've always been somebody that really hungers to learn things and that. So I was always looking into things, wanted to learn about why the world is the way it is, and curious about why people are the way they are. So it just kind of like, it was just a curiosity that started leading me down this path. And so I'm kind of like you. There's not this amazing story behind it or anything. It was curiosity.
I know, sorry guys, it's not like some grand movie where it's like we do have to take up arms to the state and defeat this legendary boss, and there's going to be explosions everywhere, and we're going to be like, yeah, we're free now. No, I'm sorry. It's going to be more like, okay, we understand what statism is. We're not going to participate. Well, we're free now.
Yeah,
like, it's
exactly.
going to be the most boring movie ever. Like, Larkin said it too in his video titled The Solution. He's like, yeah, sorry, it's not really that epic. It's just like people coming together, like two armies coming together and being like, why are we doing this? All right, let's just go home. Like, it's just...
There's your big movie. Eh? All right, we're going home. Yeah. That's it.
Like, why are we doing this? Why are we fighting each other? We don't even know each other. Like, let's just go hang out. Let's go to the bar. You know, it's like...
Exactly right, and that's and I say a lot of the times too that it's definitely, this is a war, a battle of consciousness. I think that's where the battle is people that's what they're trying to keep
between
people.
Order followers, right?
Yes,
and people who think for themselves. It's that simple. But order following is statism. Ultimately, it's the belief that you need some sort of authority telling you what to do. If you are in self-control, you know, the no party, you are...
That's a good name, the no party.
Yeah, the KNOW in the no, no party. And there's a shirt about it. There's a whole bunch of graphics online, so I kind of stole that reference, but you get the point. It's a good logical equation. It just makes sense. Like, we don't want to prescribe to either side. Like, why not just prescribe to humanity, to truth itself? Truth is our religion, nature. Yes. Right? That's what goes into deism, like that question you asked before. I didn't go that deep into it, but deism is just observing the world of nature and learning from it. It's literally natural intelligence. It's natural law. Same thing.
Yeah, that's what I tell people exactly. Yeah, we didn't cover deism that much. That was one of the...
Some people call it deism, but it's deism. It's a forgotten, quote unquote, religious philosophy back then in the 18th century. And Thomas Jefferson was a deist. A lot of the founding fathers were. They at least owned a lot of books by deists as well. The Declaration of Independence was heavily influenced by it because they wrote laws of nature to which nature's God owns. That's all like deist type speaking. Right. Because they recognize that instead of saying God, they can say laws of nature, or they could just say nature, or they can understand God through the intelligence without faith, without superstition, without miracles and supernatural events and man-made churches. They can actually understand God or the intelligence, whatever you want to call it. Right. It's very open-minded. Like, you can be a spiritual deist, you can be an agnostic deist. Like, you can still believe that there's some sort of creator or some sort of intelligence, and you can admit that you don't necessarily know all about it, but by learning from nature and learning from the laws, you recognize there is something. There has to be a first cause, and there has to be a mover type of deal.
Right. That makes, and there's no labels then. Like, there's no rigid, religion title or something to it. It's a great way to, as you said, have it. You said it perfect. Like, that's really interesting.
That's another one, right? If anybody listening is religious, and I have a documentary called Deism: The Philosophy Between Religion and Atheism. Feel free to check it out.
Oh, perfect. Well, thank you so much. I can't believe the 2 hours are up. Thank you so much, Cory, for coming on. You're always welcome back. I want to have you back on to do another 2 hours. You're always welcome back. Please, guys, check out Cory Edmond's work, One Great Work Network, and all the other places he said. Guys, thank you for being here. I really enjoy it. Take care, guys. Thank you, Cory.
Thank you.